what's up? Hello, my name is Emma, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite books of 2020. Now, I can firmly say that 2020 was not an ideal year for pretty much everyone, and also for my reading. This was the first year ever since like 2014 that I did not complete my Goodreads reading challenge. My goal was to read 50 books, and I read 46, so I was really close to completing it, but honestly, I don't care at all that I didn't read 50 books. Like, I read a lot of amazing books that will stick with me for a long time, and that's the most important thing for me. Now, this video is not going to be ranked. There's no order to me sharing these books, but the top two are definitely my top two favorites of the year. I wanted to start off with just a couple of honorable mentions. The first being The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson, which is the third and final book in the Truly's, well, no, it's not the final anymore. It's the third installment and like the finale of this story, but we have a new book in the series coming out. This was such a satisfying conclusion. The mystery of Truly Devious was so dragged out through many decades and 3 books, but by the end, all of my questions were answered, and I just came away feeling so complete after reading. Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson, which is the beautiful and heartbreaking story of a young black girl who just wants to be a singer, but she unexpectedly gets caught in a detrimental cycle of abuse by her music producer, and it is a equally quick-paced and easy to read and entertaining, but also like incredibly difficult and dark story to encounter, but one that is entirely worth it. Punching the Air by Ibi Zoboi and Dr. Yusef Salaam. This is the story of a young black teen who is incarcerated for a crime he did not commit and finds hope and a way to survive through the power of art and poetry. Punching the Air, more like punching my heart. It is one that really hits home and a story I feel everyone should experience. And The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which is a generational story about love, sisterhood, family, and identity. It is a profoundly reflective and emotional story about twin sisters who end up living completely different lives, where one of them retreats back into their original Southern black hometown while the other passes for a white rich woman, and just how their different experiences and past have completely shaped their lives. Now, starting off with my absolute favorite books of 2020, we have Heroine by Mindy McGinnis, which is the story of a high school softball star named Mickey who is in a really bad car accident and quickly and unexpectedly finds herself in the depths of an opioid addiction. This book features very graphic depictions of drug abuse and death, and for that reason, it was incredibly difficult to read for how gruesome and gritty it is, but it was equally compelling, heart-wrenching, and impossible to put down. I finished this book in like a 24-hour period and refused to do anything else until I finished it. This book touched my heart in a really deep way. It is such an accurate portrayal of how absolutely anyone can fall into the world of a drug addiction, despite your feelings on drugs and your past experiences, how much potential you have. Absolutely no one is safe from the world of addiction. I have my own story with substance abuse, which I live with every single day, and I related so much to Mickey. Sometimes it was really scary to see myself in her, but it was also incredibly comforting. There's so much talk about teen drug use prevention and abstaining and saying no to drugs, but there's so little talk about what it is really like for adolescents to be addicted and have their life entirely surrendered to drugs, and there was just nothing more I could have asked of this book to show what that's really like. It was a beautiful, hard-hitting story to experience, and I'm just so glad I read it. I hope many of you do pick this one up in the future. On a much lighter note, next on my favorites list of books I read in 2020, we have Hollow Pox, The Hunt for Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend, and this is the third book in the Nevermore series. Nevermore is such a whimsical and charming story full of expertly crafted world building and storytelling. It follows a young girl named Morrigan Crow who is given the opportunity to create a new life for herself by entering the Wondrous Society and learning to use her own magical abilities. If you are an audiobook listener, I highly recommend the audiobooks for the entire Morrigan Crow series. They are narrated by Gemma Doyle, and they just really bring the story to life. And I loved Hollow Pox so much. It honestly might be my favorite out of the entire series so far. It's kind of hard to determine because I love them all so equally, but Hollow Pox just felt different in a better way. This book just felt like a step up in the level of maturity, not necessarily in the content of it because it is still middle grade, but in the sophistication and development of the plot and characters. We learned so much more about the world of Wondersmiths and watching Morrigan grow in a new way because she's finally able to really learn to hone her powers. And we also get so much more development on the main villain, Ezra Squall, which was just fascinating to read about. This was a surprisingly timely novel. It was actually kind of humorous how relatable it is to our current circumstances, as in this book there is this new virus and there's lots of quarantines and lockdowns. Sound familiar? And it also shed a lot of light on the ostracization of the Wunimals in this society and how they are hated for their differences, which I felt was a really nice theme to tie into the entire story. I just feel like it challenged a lot of the simplicity and easy nature of the earlier books and brought it to a new level, which makes me really excited for the fourth book. I will say that at the very end of the story, Morrigan is faced with a choice that she has to make, and I felt that the option she did not choose would have been a very compelling path to take for the fourth installment. I don't really fault the author for it because it is a middle grade novel written for children, and honestly the choice she does make is more authentic to Morrigan's character, so there's nothing really to complain about. I just thought it would have been so interesting had we seen how the story went from a completely opposite direction. All in all, an absolutely fabulous book, one I recommend to everyone regardless of your reading level. If you like fantasy, the Morrigan Crow series is one you absolutely should check out. Next up on my favorites of 2020 list, we have Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. So this is the story of two girls, one living in New York City and the other living in the Dominican Republic, and the two of them find out that, to their complete surprise, they are half sisters, and they only discover this after their father has died on a flight from New York to the Dominican Republic. This is actually inspired by the very true story of Flight AA587, which was a devastating plane crash that actually happened and was largely ignored by the media, but was a devastating loss to the New York Dominican community. This is a novel written in verse, and I always like to share when I talk about books in verse that I do not like poetry. I don't ever read poetry, but over the last few years I have fallen in love with novels written in verse. And if you're someone who's interested in trying them out, or maybe you also love novels written in verse, I highly recommend Elizabeth Acevedo's books because through her just gorgeous, delicious lyrical writing, she's able to convey such deep emotion. It truly touched my heart. It's a story about grief, loss, family, love, relationships, identity, sexuality, sexism, and rape culture and secrets. It is just full of so many important stories told through these two girls who are incredibly different but find a very common ground. It is a fabulously written dual narrative story. Each of the characters have a very distinctive voice that feels super authentic and genuine. I can't say I love Camino or Yahira more. It explores how two people who have the same blood can be shaped by entirely different life experiences, but can still create something new out of a passionate, deep connection to one another. Now, I don't remember exactly why because I read this book many months ago, but I do recall feeling at the end of the book that I wanted more from it. I think it comes back to the fact that most of the story, the two girls are completely apart. It really sets the story of these two individual characters, and much later on in the story do they only really find out about each other and make contact. So I think I just really wanted to see more of the two of them together, but it is still a beautiful story. There's nothing I would change about it, and I highly recommend. Honestly, I think it might be my favorite Elizabeth Acevedo story so far. I've read all of her books, and there's just something about Clap When You Land, between the beautiful writing and the strong characterization, that it's one I just cannot forget about. Next up on my list of favorites of the year, we have Where the Crawdad Sing by Delia Owens. I don't have the physical book right now because I'm lending it to my sister after I already got my mom to read it, so it's another one that I recommend to everyone. This is actually a historical fiction novel. Wow, weird for me to make my favorites list, but I think that shows how truly amazing it was. It takes place during the 1950s and 60s and follows a young girl named Kaya who is basically abandoned by her family at the age age of 10, and she really has to raise herself entirely on her own. One of my favorite things about this story is just how breathtaking the writing was. It is incredibly atmospheric and has very vivid descriptions of marsh life in North Carolina. Delia Owens, I believe, is actually like a nature writer, and this is her first novel, and it really impressed me. It is an incredibly slow-paced character study following Clea through all of these years of her life, but I do feel that it was consistently steady throughout, though I will say I definitely enjoyed the first half of the book more than the second. Clea was just such an enchanting character. She is clever and resilient and so easy to love. She's just one of those protagonists that you are rooting for their success the entire time. I just became so invested in her getting what she wanted out of life. It's a true story about loneliness and longing for connection, which Clea doesn't even know she wants until someone actually extends their hand to her. And she really learns throughout the story about how we need to leave our fears behind in order to get that life we want to live. The two romances in the story did not really wow me at all, but it was just the overall dynamics between different character relationships that were very unique, between her and Owen and her and the other boy, but also Clea and the rest of the townspeople and those that really like try to take care of her as much as she will allow them to. And it's also an interesting combination between a coming of age story and a murder mystery, though I will say I didn't feel the mystery was all that developed, and like the police investigation courtroom scenes were not all that interesting to me. I was much more interested in just following Clea living her life. And I did have some mixed feelings on the ending, which is something I think you can find throughout many reviews, though pretty much everyone is like, the ending was so unexpected, which I can attest to. It's weirdly like left me unsettled, but also satisfied. I like still don't know how I feel about it, but it was gorgeous and a delight to read. If you missed out on the hype of Where the Crawdads Sing, I definitely recommend you give it a chance. Next up on my favorites list, we have a book that completely took my heart and refused to give it back, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and this is the story of a caseworker named Linus Baker whose job is to go to different orphanages for magical children and evaluate them, and at the beginning of the story, he is tasked by going to this isolated, remote orphanage that isn't really visited and is kind of set apart from the world because the children there are dangerous. And he just learned so much about himself and how much more there is to life, and it is just heartwarming and uplifting and funny and cute and queer and comforting. It is just impossible to leave this book without a smile on your face. It is a lower fantasy, so it's great for people like me who don't gravitate to super high fantasy, but that does not take away from the very talented construction of this world. It is technically adult fiction, but I absolutely believe it can be enjoyed by readers of all ages. There's something about it to me that felt middle grade in nature, and I think that comes back to its atmospheric charm and also well-rounded young characters. All of the children, as well as their caretaker, are just so wholly unique and special. They each bring something individual to the table, and all of them will just find a way to settle into a place in your heart. The plot of this book was a little bit predictable to me, but the writing, world building, and characterization made it feel completely refreshing and new. There's a lot of lessons about prejudice, preconceived notions, defying authority when they're wrong, and defining your own path in life that I feel is something that all of us need to hear regardless of your age. It's a story of love, friendship, trust, being open-minded, and being extraordinary in the most ordinary ways. I adored this book with every fiber of my being. It's absolutely one I want to return to over and over again throughout my life. Like, this is absolutely on the top of my rereads list and one I'll carry with me for so long. So if any of the things I said interest you, like The House of the Cerulean Sea is definitely one to put on your to-read list for 2021. I promise you won't regret it. So we have made it to my top 2 books of 2020. And I honestly don't want to pick like an absolute favorite because they're both my favorites for like very different reasons. First up, we have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is a book you have probably heard me talk about this year, and if you haven't, get used to it because this girl is here to stay. Our story starts in a small village in 1714 France where Addie is being forced into a marriage she does not want to go through with. So she prays and prays, to which a devilish god answers and gives her a curse of immortality where she is never going to die and is free to live the life that she wants. But the catch is that as soon as people are no longer looking at her, she will be entirely forgotten and has absolutely no way to leave a mark or memory on the world. So the story follows Addie throughout the centuries being forgotten, and our present day story starts in 2014 New York City, where she goes into a bookshop and one man remembers her for the very first time. My favorite thing about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is the writing. I cannot stress to you enough how stunningly beautiful it is. The original copy that I read is just dog-eared on like every single page because I wanted to savor and capture every line of this book that is just pure gold. I love V.E. Schwab. I've read many of her books, but this by far is her best and my absolute favorite. It absolutely is a slower paced novel, like those 300 years of Addie's life are extensively detailed, but I never felt bored or uninterested at any point of this story. It's one of those like bigger books where every chapter, every word is important. Addie is such an amazing main character. She is the definition of resilient, making incredible sacrifices while refusing to ever give up. Addie goes through far more than I think any typical person would be able to handle, but she still perseveres and continues on with the life that she's been given, and I just take immense inspiration from her. Henry is our second main character, and I honestly was not expecting him to have his own narrative in this story. I thought it was entirely on Addie. And while it is more focused on her, and I definitely preferred reading about Addie, I was surprised by how much he really added to the story. I adored Henry. I just thought he brought so much balance to the story because he is so grounded and real. I really valued reading about him grappling with his own depression while still wanting to make an impact in the world, and the story would absolutely be incomplete without him. And Luke. Luke is a one-of-a-kind character. I don't know if I will ever read an antagonist like him again. He's so beautifully dark and cunning and evil. I love it! It's fascinating to read about how malicious he is, being the cause of all of Addie's misfortunes, while also being the only constant in her life of loneliness, and just how much she still clings to him while also hating him. Oh, it's gorgeous. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is a tale of yearning to belong, craving freedom, the passage of time and what you do with it, the beauty that can be found in art and stories, and the value of having connections with other people. For a book about an invisible girl, it is truly one of the most unforgettable stories I have ever read. I love this book with all of my heart. It touched me in like such a deep way, and I can't wait to continue re-experiencing it in the future. It just means so much to me, and I hope you all give it a chance. And finally, my other favorite book of 2020. How could this list be complete without a Cassie Clare book? We have Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare, the first book in the Last Hour series. So Chain of Gold is the first installment in the fourth series as a part of the Shadowhunter Chronicles. It takes place during the Edwardian age of London, and it follows... How do you describe Chain of Gold? It follows the children of the cast of the Infernal Devices series, and while this team has grown up in a time of relative peace in the Shadowhunter world, there is a new type of demon along with a demonic virus that is going around London, and so they all have to deal with that along with their many interpersonal problems. The aspect I love to stress about why I think Chain of Gold is so amazing is the cast of characters. There are strong female protagonists, loving, kind friendships between boys, as well as familial bonds that go deeper than blood. And so much gay. There's so many queer characters in this book. I love it. It is truly one of the most compelling main casts I have ever read about. Like, it is huge. There's so many of them, but they are all uniquely individual, and also the deep relationships and connections between them are scarce to find elsewhere. It definitely took some effort to understand the actual relationships between all of them because there are so many friends and siblings and cousins and like love quadrangles, but once you do understand it, it's really easy to follow. We all know that Cassandra Clare is my favorite author ever, and I'm a huge fan of her books, and it has been just such a privilege to watch her improve as an author throughout all of her series. I feel like each of her individual works just get better than the last in terms of the writing and plot construction and characterization. Now, all of Cassie's books don't necessarily have to be completed before reading Chain of Gold, considering it does take place before two of the other series, but I would at the very least recommend reading the Infernal Devices series because there are so many characters and references to those books that it makes the story much more enjoyable and also helps you understand it better. And also because this is like the 4th Shadowhunter series and we're also following characters who have grown up in the Shadowhunter world, there isn't as much care into explaining the intricacies of the world. So it's recommended, maybe not your first Shadowhunter read. And I do feel that it is a more character-based book. Like there's so many different plot lines related to different character relationships, which is what the book really dives into. But I do feel that it really preserves the origins of the Shadowhunter world, which is about like fighting demons in this magical world, which I really appreciated because other books have focused more on those relationships and politics and whatnot. And in true Cassie Clare fashion, the ending is deliciously heartbreaking and sets up for a fascinating sequel. I'm so excited to read Chain of Iron this year. It's of course my most anticipated, and I just can't wait to follow these characters wherever they may go. To the darkest parts of their psyche, to the depths of hell. It doesn't matter, I am along for the ride. I am so invested, and I truly feel that the entire Last Hour series is just going to be one for the Shadowhunter history books. So that completes my list of favorite books I read in 2020. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I am definitely interested to hear if you have read any of these books and if maybe they are on your favorites list, or if you thought they were horrible and like how did we read the same book. And I would love to hear what your favorite reads of 2020 were, because maybe I need to pick them up in 2021. But nonetheless, I am really hoping for a great reading year for myself, full of amazing, life-changing stories, and I am wishing the same on to you. I don't ever really do shout outs for my other videos in my videos, but if you're interested in seeing more of the books that I am looking forward to reading in 2021, I have my most anticipated books of 2021 up on my channel. Hopefully some of them will make it onto my favorites of 2021 list. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you soon for a new one. Bye!